Hello, I'm Patrick Sheldon. Welcome to the Committee on Ben, the Business and Employment News Network. We discuss the world through the lens of jobs, and I'm pleased to welcome our first guests, Anthony Hayden Guest and Harry Siegel. Anthony is an art critic and writer for ArtNet, The Daily Beast, and the author of 6 books, as well as independent cartoonist, and as he says, a writer of rhymes. Harry is a columnist and editorial writer for the New York Daily News. We're going to be talking Supermax. The world awaits a decision of a jury in Boston. The jurors must decide if Dzhokhar Tsarnaev should be executed. If Tsarnaev is not condemned to death, he will probably be sent to the Supermax. That's the federal government's highest security facility located in Florence, Colorado. Now, prisoners there are in solitary confinement for 23 hours per day. So I have to ask our panelists, is this ethical? Would it be ethical, Anthony, would it be ethical to take a job in such a place as a guard?
Well, you have to understand, when people commit these crimes, some do it, some commit crimes because they're true believers. Some people commit crimes because they're psychopaths. Most people commit crimes because they're greedy and don't make a connection between crime and punishment. But the fact is, the legal system has been set up mostly to when Admiral Byng, the British admiral who I once played at school, was hanged, I think the last British, Voltaire said it was to encourage the others. And, you know, we set this system up, this horrible system, in order to discourage everybody else from doing the same things. If they walked, we'd be seeing bombs all over the place. So, is it ethical? I don't know what the constitutional rights are, you know. I guess I would rather have been solitary than executed. I'm sure the treatment is reasonably humane. It's a tough call.
So let's ask Harry, do you consider it ethical? Would you even take a job in a place like that as a guard?
Well, a prison system is something less than ethical. And any time you're setting up a special system for the worst of the worst, you're further confusing what are already some pretty bizarre issues, right? Like, is prison meant, are these penitentiaries? So the term solitary comes from the term penitentiary comes from the Quakers and this 19th century idea that they'd have quiet for their souls and they become penitent. And plainly that hasn't been the case. You have to ask what you're arresting people for. Are you doing it so they can be rehabilitated? Are you doing it because it's the only decent thing to do because you can't let them free, but you can't just kill them? This is all pretty badly muddled. As to whether or not it's ethical to work there, I have no idea. If you have a complicated, broken system, this is very, you know, and you need to eat and feed your family. What are you supposed to do? Our whole jobs program in New York State back in the 1980s was prisons. Not Supermaxes, just regular prisons. Outside of New York, that was the economy. And if you're living there, you fight to keep those prisons. You say this is law and order, this is good, and you eat. I like eating.
Well, Anthony points out that it might be better than execution, but what about cruel and unusual punishment? Would this be unconstitutional?
Well, you know, Dickens was visiting those Pennsylvania prisons, and he said, this is horrific. This is soul-rendering, soul-tearing, atrocious stuff. People I've talked to have spent reasonably long stretches of time in solitary. You know, they have a range of feelings about it, from this was very boring and difficult to I lost touch with who I was as a person, and my insides fell out, and I wanted to die, and I thought I would. And using that as some form, and it's not really meant to encourage people to behave better or send a model to others. It's a way within this strange, doubly closed society inside a prison of controlling people you can't really deal with otherwise. It's what works for the administrators. So in some ways, like, solitary is the ultimate bureaucratic nightmare inflicted on often horrifically terrible people. And it seems to me like a tremendously, I'm not saying there are other easy solutions, but appalling situation to deal with, and almost entirely removed from the realm of ethics. Like, when you start with, we're going to have people who are locked up for 23 hours a day, and hey, I guess their treatment's fairly decent. We wouldn't know because they live in a black box that no one inside can talk about. You're not starting from a healthy place. And obviously, just in regular state systems and elsewhere where people have done this sort of solitary, it's often been hugely destructive for them. And for the ones who want to plot evil, for instance, gang leaders in Los Angeles, they had guys who spent 20 years in 23.5-hour-a-day solitary and continue to run efficiently and effectively their gangs inside and outside the prisons, send instructions, and deal with all this. So in the course of creating this special worst of the worst system, they didn't really solve that problem. And they took, I think, the prison administrators who created it and the politicians who paid for it, they took some moral strain on themselves.
Well, let me just ask Anthony to bring you back into the. Do you know of another system? I mean, Europe is no stranger to terrorism. Is there another way they handle it that maybe we could learn?
Norwegians have complicated and quite humane systems. The other thing is, prisons are animal factories. If you're not a criminal when you go in, you're almost certainly one when you come out. I think many Scandinavian systems are notably more humane than the American system, from what I hear.
Harry, what do you think?
So my friend Jessica Benko was just there for the New York Times, and these are lovely, civilized facilities, basically for the worst of the worst. The supervillains, and there's a wall, and that's it. And it's a really tall wall, and you can't get out, and that's sort of terrible. You can see the sky, their kitchens, there's knives in the kitchens. She's, a young woman in her 30s, and she's there reporting with these guys with their knives while they're making dinner and offering her food. And for whatever sets of reasons, parts of this seem to work. I think you can push that too hard. I'm not sure. The first step should be knives in all the prisons here. But within any system, you create sort of, including prisons, you create broad social expectations for what can and can't go, and those largely self-police. I think one of the issues we get into, and we've seen this with policing, and you see it with prisons, is when instead of having these big punishments come down when areas fail to police themselves, and instead they just become the default. You've done this thing, so we have to arrest you. If we arrest you, we have to send you to prison. If we send you to prison, we have to treat you this way. You create a whole new set of problems. And incredibly, the problems from the outside tend to imitate. So in New York, at Rikers, which is far from Supermax, although they've had a lot of problems with solitary and solitary with juveniles, right? It's like you have all these people who are there for drug crimes who are selling drugs. And the guards are bringing the drugs in. And it's quite insane. It's like everything wrong with prohibition on steroids, if you like, or on speed, because it's hard to get their drugs in, so the prices are 20 to 30 times higher, so the economic incentives are that much greater, so the drugs consistently come in, and there are people who sort of like being there because there's so much money to be made, more than on the outside if you actually have a handle on those operations.
This goes back to what Anthony was saying too, about if you weren't when you went in, you weren't when you go out.
Animal factor.
For a little background, the prison was built in response to the murders of 2 guards in Illinois. The killings were carried out by leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood. These neo-Nazis were already serving multiple life sentences, and the government argues that additional life sentences have no meaning for these psychopaths. So, Anthony, what's the alternative?
Well, we're ruling out execution, I suppose. Well, exactly the kind of, I don't think, obviously, physically inhumane, but I think, being left alone with yourself. Though your point about people running complicated extortion and criminal schemes from solitary cells, there's got to be a way to prevent that, I would have thought. If people are left on their own, I think that'd be pretty serious for 20 or 30 years.
Harry, how would you handle it?
I was talking to Jabbar Collins, who served about 20 years for a murder he didn't commit in New York. He spent a lot of that time in solitary. And he was asking me if, I asked him if he'd read Dumas, and he said, The Count of Monte Cristo. And I cracked up. And, there's no easy way to handle it. You have time and you have nothing else, and a lot of people's brains just break at a certain point. Imagine what you would be like if you stared at the same wall for an hour. It's a little boring, and 12 hours, then you go to sleep and you wake up and there's a little food there. And then you do that again, and then 3 years pass, and you don't know how long it's going to be, or you do, and it's just, there's that, and that's your life.
And you mentioned some people, but we have more names to drop, too, of people actually in this situation. Among the 400-odd inmates are the leader of the neo-Nazi terror group known as the Worldwide Church of the Creator, and the head of the Chicago outfit that plotted 18 murders. There's Soviet spy Robert Hansen, He was responsible for at least 15 deaths of American intelligence agents. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, he's serving 8 life sentences. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, serving 3 life sentences. Ramzi Youssef, planner of the 1993 World Trade Center attack, and Zacarias Moussaoui, the financer of 9/11. So do you sympathize with the feelings of family members of some of the victims or the inmates who want them punished as cruelly as possible? Anthony, what do you think?
Of course I sympathize with the feelings. It doesn't necessarily mean I share them, though. You know, yeah, I sympathize with the feeling of people have been wounded, of course. Well, it'd be quite inhuman not to, but it means you have to be rational about it and decide. I mean, these are not simple situations. You know, it's not a math equation. You're dealing with human beings, and when they've done these things under very different circumstances. And I mean, I didn't study the shoe bomber case very closely, but clearly he was not the same as a mass murderer. You know.
What do you think, Harry?
I think Anthony's exactly right. These are very different people and circumstances. And you have 2 things here. What you want for justice as a person, if you've been hurt or wounded, and my human sympathy with that is very different from how you want the state to provide justice. There's meant to be a level of detachment there. Secondly, you're looking at some people who, say Ted Kaczynski, who had a ton of agency, or Hansen, with what they were doing, and others like Richard Reed. This guy, he won the schmuck lottery, and he was serious, and he played his role there, but he wasn't the king planner. He was the guy who couldn't light his shoe with the explosives on fire, and that's terrible, and I'd like him to be punished, but I don't think we're punishing AQAP by throwing this guy, this failed functionary, into Supermax.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. From what I read, absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, the Supermax was designed to be a prison from which no escape was possible. Is that even reasonable, do you think?
Probably nowadays, I'm sure one can escape from anywhere. Yes.
Yeah, so probably this is hypothetical.
It'd be very difficult, but given 23 hours a day to think about nothing else, It does. It just feels very cartoonish to me, like we're watching a Marvel superhero movie. Magneto, they keep putting in prisons that no one can escape, and there's no metal allowed in. And somehow, by the end of Act 1, he's escaped.
Yeah, it does seem that way. But let me ask more practically: what kind of an effect do you think that has on the people who work these prisons?
I haven't been nearly that far in the system, but talking to prison guards from my own experience inside holding cells in the Tombs in New York and that sort of stuff, not as a reporter, just as a prisoner, talking to cops and all that, it's depressing. It's not a really pleasant work environment, and sure, you're doing shifts, but spending 8 hours a day listening to people who need to go to the bathroom, talk about their rights, and you can't respect any humanity in what they're saying, it's nice to have a pension, but it's actually a sort of brutal way to get there, and that's in an ordinary system. And again, we don't know that much about what happens inside the Supermaxes or how administration really works there. There are a lot of controls on what the prisoners can get out, even through their lawyers. The guards don't talk, and so it ends up being a bit of another strange black box. But I've got to imagine, you know, people talk about jobs they do for the love, and they're happy to have the pay. I mean, you don't hear that very often from prison guards or you know, officers, as they prefer to be called. You're in the animal factory, and you're supposed to be administering it. And to some extent, in almost every setting, and maybe it's different and more convenient in the Supermax setting, you have to let the animals administer themselves, and that's not good for the soul.
So we're on the subject of the Supermax. What about the big one, Guantanamo, Anthony? What do you think? Should it be shut down, as Obama promised?
Again, I really do not have enough information about how many of the people in there are legitimately in there. Let's assume they're all legitimately in there. I don't want to say anything airy about this. There have been promises made about that place. Already, some people were released, I understand, from Guantanamo, already got re-involved with various activities, terrorist activities, I believe. 2 or 3, I understand. So, you know, the government's watchfulness is, I think, extremely understandable.
And Harry, what do you think, Guantanamo?
Well, the healthy thing about Obama's failed pledge to close it, and the political complications that ensued, and the fact that a lot of the easiest people to get out and have other countries repatriate was already done, was that it showed to the small cohort of Americans who are paying some real attention, that these are actually politically and practically complicated issues, and that it wasn't this one fool president or this other, depending on where your politics are, that I think everyone finally thinks that having a special terror prison system has not worked terribly well, and a separate justice system that hasn't worked terribly well. But what would work better in its place turns out to be a much more complicated question, and one that we haven't yet had a political solution to here. Let's hope we get to one. But I don't think you can answer, should it be shut down, without answering, should it be shut down, and then we have what?
The French had somewhere called Devil's Island.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very interesting topic and very timely, considering that we're waiting the results in the Boston court. Stay with us. This is Ben and I'm Patrick Sheldon. In our upcoming segment, our panelists are going to discuss whether casino gambling is a bet worth making for jobs.